As we move into this next session of our program, entitled Power, I'm proud to introduce this next video from Tatiana Rebel, mother, activist, organizer, writer, performer, and champion of justice. A powerful piece that exemplifies the idea of positive language, addresses our next generation of change leaders, and the power to make that change that resides in all of us. This is her piece, The Treasured.
To my children, and the children of this city, to the overlooked and forgotten, to the lost and those never to be found, this is for all of you. I know things seem upside down. Every week births a new hashtag and a debate about humanity. There are a million voices screaming into the void, and you don't know which to hold on to. May these words comfort you and be a reminder that you are the treasure. Some people may weaponize your skin because they refuse to acknowledge your greatness. They will fear you and your strength because you are a mirror to their darkest secret and a key to a history they'd rather lock away. Know this. Soaked in your pores is a lineage of survival, a lineage that was carried across oceans, traversed through deserts, and crossed mountains. No matter if by choice, by force, or tasked with building an empire. Remember, the same sun that shone down on your ancestors warmed you as well. Your skin is not a weapon, but a reflection of the sun's reach of days past and days coming, a gift for you, the treasure. Some people will forget what it's like to be young. They'll place expectations on you that they don't adhere to themselves. They will lose sight of your humanity and try to deny you your right to exist. Some may even forget their oaths to protect and only serve those that look like them. Know this. Your mistakes and the mistakes of others do not determine who you will always be. Remember, you are more than mugshots and hashtags. You are more than a suspect and excuses used to profile. You are worthy of the joy that comes from learning from your mistakes. Mistakes that create opportunities for growth, especially for you, the treasured. Some will try to silence you as you speak out. They will try to burden you with teaching them about how they have harmed you. They will pretend history does not exist and turn the other cheek when it gets uncomfortable. Know this. In you lies the pulse of a movement started generations ago. Your words expand into the language of revolution, and silence has done nothing to create change. Remember to make sure that when you speak, you mean it. Let the words that cross your mouth speak the spirit of your soul, a call to the ancestors that see you for who you are, the treasured. Some will see you and do everything in their power to ensure that you do not suffer for their misdeeds. They will take it to the streets and to the State House to fight for you. They'll bring light to the shadows so you won't have to. They will exist to show you no matter your gender presentation or sexual orientation, you can have a life full of joy, love, and happiness. Know that you are not alone. And many of us are fighting to give you a life better than we could have ever dreamed. Know you are more than your ancestors' struggles, but also our wildest dreams. Remember that you deserve to find your passion, to know the beauty of feeling unconditional love, to find the ways you are soft, not just strong. In you lies the spirit of Drejon Reed and Breonna Taylor, Fannie Lou Hamer and Shirley Grisham, Bayard Rustin and Marsha P. Johnson. You are earth guardians and water protectors. You are the creators and innovators. In you marches the spirit of Stonewall and Standing Rock, Tiananmen Square, and those marching in Portland and Minneapolis. Standing with those fighting today and whose shoulders we all stand upon. From the backyards to the State House, from the schools to the hospitals, from cries on the street to the whispers at home, every day, the truth is taking a stand and finding its power. Things are changing. And they're changing for you because you are the gift of life renewed. You truly are the treasured.
Well, our theme for this part of the program, as Marisol said, is power. So talk about a powerful way to get started, the power of words, of art, and creative expression. Thank you, Tatiana, for another beautiful and very moving piece. Here with me to continue this conversation is Guadalupe Pimentel Solano, a very powerful woman, a CICF Community Leadership Officer, and a founder of the Indiana Undocumented Youth Alliance, co-chair of the Mayor's Latino Advisory Council, and a founding member of the Latino Youth Collective. Welcome, Lupe.
Thank you, Brian. You know, one thing that struck me about Tatiana's piece, even as it speaks to the struggles that are happening right now and have been happening for many centuries in this country, it never stops speaking directly to our community's young people, the treasured. It is very focused on what we need to hear now to prepare for this future.
At the same time, I think it keeps the history in mind as much as it does the current state of the world. It says exactly what we're dealing with. It doesn't go easy on us, and it raises some tough questions.
I think it also speaks to some of those conversations we've been having with one another. They do need to happen. They need to happen now. They need to include specific talk about the adjustments to power to allow all people that joy and beauty and unconditional love.
I'm very excited to see the next video because I know you cover all of that in this next conversation.
I do. I sat down with Carla Lopez Owens, and I had the chance to ask her about some of those very things. Although Carla and I speak English fluently, we held a conversation in Spanish because, in order to engage in equity, we must listen and hold ourselves accountable to the communities most impacted by inequity. By filming our video in Spanish, Carla and I invite our families and the Latinx community into a conversation about race and equity, while highlighting the continuing lack of language access in the spaces where these conversations take place. Enjoy.
Mi nombre es Guadalupe Pimentel Solano. Yo nací en Córdoba, Veracruz, México, y he estado en los Estados Unidos desde el año 1999. Me empecé a involucrar, fue cuando yo me di cuenta que no tenía papeles y estaba llenando una aplicación para una beca, y cuando le pedí a mi mamá mi número de seguro social, no me lo pudo dar, así que así fue la manera que yo me di cuenta que no tenía papeles y que era indocumentada. Y desde ese tiempo me empecé a involucrar en los derechos para inmigrantes, y no hemos dejado de empujar para legislaciones que nos den papeles y, la verdad, para que nos traten con respeto y con dignidad.
Yo vine a los Estados Unidos en el año 1999 y algunas veces nos gusta bromear que Lupe y yo somos primas porque vinimos a los Estados Unidos el mismo año. Pienso que mucho de las razones por las cuales yo me involucré a la edad que yo me involucré es que siento como que creciendo en el estado de Indiana casi no hemos tenido una opción, creciendo de la manera que hemos crecido, por ejemplo, pobres, inmigrantes, mujeres, sin papeles, y eso como que te da, la sociedad ya te ha categorizado en unas cajas, entonces sentir que siempre tienes que enfrentar estas dificultades, en mi opinión, yo tuve que aprender cómo manejar esas dificultades, y en el proceso de manejar, de aprender cómo manejar esas dificultades, aprendí muchas cosas, y por eso una de las razones que yo decidí ir a la escuela de derechos, es para aprender cómo funcionan los sistemas de la ley, de la política, para mejor entender por qué era que la sociedad nos había puesto en estas cajas. Y para explicarte, pues, como que no sentía que yo tenía una opción más allá que involucrarme, porque eso era mi vida, esto es mi vida.
Durante esas dificultades, ¿qué obstáculos has visto que has tenido que sobrepasar?
Pienso que son los sistemas que tenemos que enfrentar todos los días, los sistemas de racismo, que sabemos que muchas personas han tenido que enfrentar en el pasado por muchos años, las personas morenas, las personas indígenas.
Y hablando de sistemas y obstáculos, recientemente tú tuviste una campaña donde quisiste llenar una vacancia de el Consejo Municipal, y había 4 personas que estaban también tratando de obtener o llenar esa vacancia. Y ese lugar en particular tiene una comunidad latina, pero al final del día no ganaste y no hay representación latina en esa manera. ¿Cómo piensas tú que el racismo impactó tu campaña durante ese tiempo?
Para contestar tu pregunta, pienso que hay muchas personas que son cómplices en lo que sucedió ese día, cuando no eligieron, tenían la oportunidad de elegir a alguien que era latina, pero no lo hicieron. Y pienso que una de las razones es porque las personas que están en liderazgo no son honestas con uno mismo al decir que si ellos dicen que quieren progreso y quieren incluir a las personas, pero al fin de cuentas, cuando tienen la oportunidad de hacerlo, no lo hacen.
Entonces, en este momento hay unos nuevos líderes en nuestra comunidad y siento que algo que he visto yo es que no están esperando a su turno. Muchas veces siento que nos dicen, espera su turno y va a llegar. ¿Cuáles son las razones que piensas que esos líderes están saliendo o que están diciendo, ya nos vamos a esperar?
Pienso que tiene mucho que ver con el hecho de que ya estamos hartos. Muchas personas ya se cansaron de esperar y si ellos ven que el cambio no viene rápidamente, entonces estos líderes que tú estás hablando van a tomar la situación en sus propias manos y hacer el cambio por sí mismos. Y yo tengo mucha admiración y mucho respeto para estas personas porque muchas de las veces entendemos que estamos yendo contra el sistema y entendiendo que vamos a enfrentar estas dificultades otra vez, toma mucho de una persona. Pero si esos líderes no los hacen y esos líderes que son elegidos tampoco los hacen, ¿quién lo va a hacer?
To continue this conversation about power, I'd like to welcome Kyra Harvey of Indy 10 Black Lives Matter, Ali Tab of Surge, Showing Up for Racial Justice, and Maricruz Luna of Ayuya, the Indiana Undocumented Youth Alliance.
Together, we have created not promises to our community, but instead demands for leadership in our community. When the systems and the laws of the community were established, only white men were at the table. When the Constitution was written by white men, it only established freedom and liberties to white men. The time for change is now.
We, the people of Indiana, in order to form a more inclusive union, to establish justice, to provide access and opportunity, to promote the dismantlement of systemic racism, and to secure the blessings of economic mobility and empowerment to all, do ordain and establish this public letter to the leaders of Indiana.
Article 1. Dear leaders, we demand that you delegitimize the white supremacy culture that shapes our institutions and businesses. Black and brown lives matter. Women of color, like Shanice Wallace, are 4 times more likely to die during childbirth. Young people of color, like Andre Green and Tamir Rice, are more likely to be penalized, pathologized, and killed for engaging in behaviors that white children do. We demand that you sit with the discomfort that comes with recognizing the consequences of your privilege. We demand that you prioritize equitable education that represents our communities and creates the leaders who will build a better world. Children should not be told Christopher Columbus was a hero. Whitewashing history perpetuates white supremacy. We demand that every student be guaranteed meals in school. Ending lunch shaming is the bare minimum that we can do to address child hunger in the richest nation on earth. We demand that you recognize the work that Black, Indigenous, people of color have already done. We do not need to reinvent the wheel. We demand transparency and accountability from law enforcement when citizens file a complaint. Until we invest in safer communities that don't rely on the violence of policing, the least you can do is own up to your mistakes and be held accountable. We demand that you listen and trust women of color. We demand that you listen and trust women of color. We demand that you who are empowered take action. You must do more than attend and applaud and toast events about diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Article 2. Dear leaders, we demand a moratorium on building new jail cells, selling bodies for cheap labor supposedly seized in 1865. We demand the end of cash bail. The American value of innocent until proven guilty should not have a cash value placed on it. We demand the reallocation of funds from the police to social services. We demand that IMPD be removed from mental health calls so being murdered like Christopher Goodloe and Eleanor Northington won't happen again. We demand to know what happened to Keyshawn Stewart and Carrington Tompkins. We demand justice for Drajon Reed and Mikkel Rose. There's been a lack of accountability and transparency. We are past reform. These families know no justice, and therefore the city will know no peace. We demand public and immediate condemnation of elected officials by their peers, both red or blue, when their position of power is used to disseminate division through racism, sexism, homophobia, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, xenophobia, transphobia, and any other form of hatred.
Article 3. Dear leaders, we demand a bill to provide our undocumented residents the opportunity to obtain driver's license. Economic mobility is hindered when mobility is oppressed. We demand the revoking of xenophobic bills that prevent undocumented students from access to the state financial aid and the right to a fair and equitable education. Aiding our people cannot just be words. Put your money and actions where your mouth is. We demand undocumented residents have the right to unemployment benefits. During the pandemic, people are forced to either save their lives or deplete their life savings. We demand programs to be erected for loan opportunities for the immigrant and undocumented community. You promote the American dream, but will not finance the dream of the dreamers.
These are our amendments to a system that has systematically oppressed generations of our nation. Any of those who have not identified with the status quo of a white, cisgendered, straight, Christian man.
And while we respect the leaders who came before us, know that we are not waiting for an invitation into your ivory tower boardroom or a fancy new title behind our names.
We are entitled to use our power to create a community that works for us all, and all of us will continue to push forward in this work.
And we are not going anywhere. Signed,
The new generation of power.
Wow. I just want to say to you ladies right on, it takes a lot of courage to stand up here and to do what you're doing every day. So I want to thank you personally. I want to thank you on behalf of CICF. Lupe, thank you so much for your continued leadership at CICF. The words that you all have said have been inspiring, aspirational, and bring confirmation to what's necessary. Once again, I am Pamela Ross, CICF Vice President of Opportunity, Equity, and Inclusion. What excites me about this generation of change is the understanding that the issue of racism in this country is beyond how individuals think and treat one another, but that the path to equity, true equity for all, lies within dismantling of systems. Systems that have purposely designed to lift one group higher and higher by not being right to people. I practiced that several times, just didn't work. These days, words like opportunity and equity and diversity are buzzwords we all hear a lot in both the nonprofit and for-profit business communities. This is actually a good thing. But sometimes when we hear these words over and over, even when they are very powerful and necessary ideas, that's all they sometimes are just ideas. They need to be matched by accountability and action. So as we talk, we need to keep getting real about that. We are not merely talking about ideas and values. We are talking about real people and their lived experiences of how systems have prevented them from opportunity. We need to have conversations that are not only about building awareness of our reality, but also about finding opportunities to change our reality. And a huge key to that is through building authentic relationships from those who don't look like you, who don't live in your neighborhood like yours, or who don't have jobs such as yours. When we as individuals and community leaders expand our networks and expand our minds, that is the precipice of great change beyond the buzzwords. We have many great examples throughout our communities, but one of the most exciting has been happening right here in the heart of our city. I recently had the awesome opportunity to interview Imhotep Adisa, co-founder and executive director of Khepra Institute, and Michael Huber, president and CEO of the Indy Chamber, to talk about how these two individuals from polar opposite spaces in the structures of power found a middle ground to learn and build together. The Indy Chamber is an establishment of over 100 years supporting advocacy and the support of economic development and business membership in the city. Khepra Institute is at its core empowerment through self-mastery, focusing on youth and coaching young adults to be leaders, critical thinkers, and doers. The way these two leaders are learning from each other and supporting each other is the example we all should follow. Let's listen.
This is quite a treat for me to be able to have this opportunity to interview the two of you. How did you two come together? Given the spaces that you hold, how did you two begin the relationship that you have right now, and what has that meant to each of you in the power seats that you have?
I remember the first or second time that we met. I remember saying, I remember thinking, is this weird? I remember saying to Imhotep, could we just get together on a regular basis to just, so I could just find out more?
And so you come over to our campus and we'd have coffee and chop it up. And it was always fun to watch you because, you come out of a workspace where outcomes are so important.
Yeah.
That same thing in this space. We got folks on our team that say, why come you over still talking to people? And I'm fortunate enough to be in a space where my outcome is the relationship.
Yeah.
And then out of that, other things can come up out of that. I said, okay, this is somebody that I can have real talk with, real conversation beyond our potential disagreement around spaces. Relationships where folks trying to bring about authentic change and learn from each other. It's been a real positive result of that particular relationship.
They bring these people together with divergent viewpoints, but it's a space where those viewpoints are really going to be heard. And that is not happening very much in our culture. The other thing is, I will say, CICF has really opened the door to a lot of these relationships, giving a Chamber of Commerce permission to have conversations about race. And part of it is there's a little bit of fear, of, hey, I know the Chamber doesn't have our Chamber of Commerce in Indianapolis and Chambers of Commerce in general don't have great histories of being inclusive. And there's a little bit of fear of, well, if we start talking about this, are we going to have a leg to stand on? But I think what one of the important things that CICF has done through its strategic plan is given us permission to put it on the table, even if we don't know all the answers, and acknowledge where an institution like ours has made mistakes. And what's been very rewarding is people like, including Khepra Institute and Imhotep, it allows them to really step in and influence the work.
Sure.
So I'm grateful for that. Social capital is so underrated. The social capital oftentimes gets lost when we talk about economic development, because we're talking about if you're really gonna build an inclusive economy that creates opportunities for everybody, and you're not addressing people who don't have the social capital. These are not the kinds of things that are going to show up in the economic statistics that we're all familiar with. It's the first experience I've had in the last 2 years at times when I'm thinking, is everything that I learned up to this point wrong, and I just have to start over? And now I think we're starting to see the rewards.
I don't share Michael's optimism about things. You just look at history, and this is not where we find ourselves now. Is not a new place. It continues to occur, and it continues to occur every time we make progress, particularly in the racial space. There's a pushback, and it's often very very physical, always structural. State violence manifests itself in a variety of different ways. What I would like for it not to be that way, where I would like that social capital to not have to deal with structural racism, white supremacy. I would really love that, but I'm not drinking that Kool-Aid. As a community, we have to build institutions that allow us to engage with others in ways that help us make sure that our community interests are also supported. And I think you can only do that by building relationships with other human beings that, and even more so in spaces where folks have power, which, you know, truth of the matter, those mostly white men.
One of the things you said, Michael, is, you know, sometimes we take for granted social capital. And I think that, you know, when you're in the community, though, often because of systemic racism, that's what you have, is each other. How can you talk about the power of the community? And also, I think it's important because I think that there's reciprocity in these relationships.
I think for all of us, for myself, there's part of it that has to be personal. And it's like, I think the work that CICF is also doing hands-on with organizations is very meaningful. And here's one thing that comes to mind, and that is, I think a lot of us in traditional industries or institutions who are white like me, I think you also have to sort of discover the power that you have, because when you're transactional all the time and you're only working on the next deal, and a lot of us live in that world, you'll hear, you know, Pam, you or Imhotep or somebody say, okay, the establishment has to give up power, or we don't build an inclusive community without the white establishment giving up power. Part of this journey for us at the Chamber, I think, in these relationships is discovering our power and owning our responsibility in a way that we would have not just through our typical business transactional relationships, if that makes sense. The rewards of these new relationships have been greater than I ever anticipated, you know, and just my, you know, just feeling kind of my mind expanding. And I know we're going to have to deliver on the result. You can't, it's not just good feelings. And this is tough stuff. I mean, I realize we're talking about generations of racism and racial inequities.
The relationships, you know, I just can't say enough about relationships. You just have to build relationships. So as folks in power, as Michael said earlier, looking at and realizing that they have it, what can they do now? Well, one thing you do right now is engage with people other than yourself, authentically and honestly. Create relationships that allow you to do that. It's difficult to do often in your own workspaces because the power dynamics that exist in those spaces. But talk to other folks that have experiences in community, don't look like you, and try to learn something. Building relationships, that's a long road. You don't build a relationship overnight. You know, you got to have a relationship with someone. I think the ambassador is a good example of that. But the amount of trust that's non-existent in our country is going to require that those with power and resources have to demonstrate it. And then you have to be able, when people say, I don't believe you, to do it again and again and again and again. And I will say, just watching again, Brian, and also you, Michael, that I see that effort taking place to build relationships and actually expand those relationships, social capital, into your own space with other members of your team, that for those relationships potentially to build, that it will allow us to try to make the kind of real change we like to see.
Thank you again to Imhotep and Michael for their transparency. So we want to change. We know we need to change, but how do we get to change? One part of this work I'm closest to is our work in neighborhood empowerment and placemaking. In this case, we have been changing how we relate to the people and the leadership in the neighborhood. We recognize that historically, we don't have the credibility or the power in many of our neighborhoods, but many of the residents that have the credibility and power to make things happen. So we need to work with them and listen to them and help them realize their vision for their communities. The residents in these communities are untapped assets and have gifts yet to be celebrated by our city and our region. We have learned over the years that these neighborhoods are not underserved, they are not marginalized, but rather they are underappreciated. This shift has been paramount within our organization as we continue to help finding new ways to appreciate each of our neighbors in every day. Inside all of us and inside of all of our organizations we lead or belong to, it's the same. The power to change, to become anti-racist, is not in some laws we'll pass or some set of guidelines we'll follow or even in some grant we'll make. The power to change the way we work as organizations and as people comes from within us. It depends on the actions we take each and every day and commit to taking moving forward. So where do we begin? Well, I have some suggestions as to where we can start. For starters, if you believe in equity and inclusion, but are an all-white organization, you need to change that. If you believe in equity and inclusion, but you have no leaders of color, you need to change that. If you are an institution that predominantly serves people of color, but your staff and board do not represent the community you serve, you absolutely need to change that. This one is huge, and we've already talked about it a bit. But if you are one of the many institutions of power in this community that can actually make a real change for all, but you have no pathway to authentically listen to resident voices, you need to change that. If you are a hiring manager or in human resources and struggle to find diversity in your applicants and new hires, you need to ask yourself why, and know that you need to change that. If you are an institution that has not examined your policies and practices through the lens of access, inclusion, and racial equity, you need to change that and institutionalize your work in perpetuity. So you want to make it a part of your institution, yes, but you've got to do more than just create a document. You got to make it a part of your day-to-day practice and a part of your culture. It's a process, not an endpoint. A lot of this is going on right now. So if your organization has a diversity, equity, and inclusion position, but their power gets stifled when the work doesn't feel good or right, you need to change that. Empower them to make real change in your work. Otherwise, they are merely tokens. And publicly, I want to acknowledge Brian Payne for never having done that to me. If you don't believe Black and brown people continue to be unfairly held back due to racist systems, you must get informed, but also recognize yourself as part of the problem. And lastly, but certainly not least, if you know racist systems exist and want to see equality for all, be an advocate. Use your power. Use your voice to make a real change. We can use the power we have and the power we're building for good, just as long as we are all intentional about it.
Thank you, Pam. Those words and recommendations from Pam, which internally we call her manifesto, have resonated across the community. She's made those remarks in many situations and to many organizations. We all must listen to and enact these principles. Well, now I'm going to ask a group of corporate and civic leaders to come up to the stage and make declarations of commitment to our community. These are white leaders who are boldly taking on systemic racism at their companies, across the systems they represent, and in their personal lives. Their efforts and commitment are part of the growing momentum that is building throughout our communities that clearly states that the time for change is now. Thank you for being here. We're going to start with Norman Burns of Conner Prairie. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Brian. The past couple of years, we have worked diligently on our diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion promise statement for Conner Prairie to be a place where the doors are always open to a diversity of voices and limitless experiences. We've made progress in some areas of accessibility and inclusion, but are now facing the difficult conversations and decisions surrounding diversity and equity as a museum. The goal of our DEAI promise is to identify and address exclusionary practices and policies within our organization. Conner Prairie recognizes we have been falling short of meeting the needs of our staff and community around race and inclusion. We openly and honestly acknowledge that racism remains a problem within our own organization, just as it is within our community and nation. But by acknowledging these truths, we can begin to address the systemic issues facing both our own organization and the greater society. That's why we vow to work for systemic change and growth within our own institution. We vow to learn from that growth so we can better educate our visitors on the full story of America. And we recognize the need to engage all Americans to step into the story, one that they have created and recognized to be true. Conner Prairie has sought out the resources that are needed to examine our organizational systems, our policies, and procedures to address these systemic challenges. Our multi-pronged approach to D&I training, called Opening Doors to Inclusion, is an initiative that incorporates lessons learned from our focus period of DEAI exploration, analysis, planning, and practice. The goal of this is to ensure a consistent, inclusive decision-making process is happening across all levels of our institution for all decisions at all times. As the president and CEO of Conner Prairie, I acknowledge the privilege afforded me as a white male and promise to work with the community and others to ensure that Conner Prairie is taking the appropriate steps to hold our teams accountable. At this moment in my life and career, my white privilege has allowed me to not only be the CEO of the Smithsonian Affiliate Museum Conner Prairie, but also to be the chair of the American Association for State and Local History. And next year, I'm very honored to be co-president of the Indianapolis Consortium of Arts Administrators, along with Keisha Dixon of Asante Art Institute. Keisha and I are really looking forward to this co-leadership opportunity and what it means for our community. I personally pledge to work side by side with all of my colleagues at all levels to identify and begin removing the systemic issues and systematic policies of racism constraining us so that we can become an inclusive society that speaks with one voice. As an organization, Conner Prairie will continue our pledge to live our mission statement that focuses on serving everyone, a mission that we realize is generational in its approach and can only be achieved with the help of many community partners. We pledge to apply our DEA promise statement to all decisions that we make around our institution, including hiring practices in the board recruitment process, exhibit and program development, evaluation, and promotion of all staff. In doing this, we believe that the community's voice will be heard throughout our organization. Conner Prairie will continue to listen and remain diligent and committed to social justice activities. That diligence is because we know that we have generational work ahead of us. As a history museum, it is our responsibility to invite this generation and the next to step into the story, to learn from the past to inform the present, so that we can make tomorrow's story even brighter for everyone. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Maria Rose, and I'm the Chief Administrative Officer of Cummins. I grew up in Indianapolis, and I have lived and worked in this city almost my entire adult life. I have known on an intellectual level that structural racism exists in our country, and yes, right here in Indianapolis. Yet I have not appreciated the economic and emotional toll that this racism has taken on our Black community. For far too long, we have turned a blind eye to this issue. The time is now for us to act to rid our city of the systems, processes, and structures that perpetuate racism. As members of the Indianapolis business community, we have a responsibility to act now. We need to give our citizens everything that they can to help them succeed. On Friday, Cummins will announce a program to actively participate in effecting change in our communities. Please pledge your time and talent to help make Indianapolis a city that is in the forefront of this change.
At Eskenazi Health, we know what centuries of racial and social injustice can do. Our entire mission, our health system, and everything we do within it and within our community is focused on pushing back. But we know better than to rest on our mission. We know that despite our best intentions and all the ways in which we succeed, we are at the same time products of the mistruths, of the deliberately created policies and institutions that have resulted in this disproportionate burden of poor health. We're unwitting carriers of the biases required to perpetuate the very injustice we work to address. So we know there's much to do. I'm listening, and I'm hearing gut-wrenching stories from employees who have candidly and with compassion shared with me their lived and witnessed experiences. My personal pledge is to act on what I'm learning, to be just as deliberate in leading the examination of all of our organizational goals, our policies, our practices, our processes, outcomes, and experiences of care, where we direct our resources, which organizations we partner with and support, all through the lens of racial equity, with transparency and humility. To continue to listen carefully and to read widely, with the singular goal of being just as effective in systematically hardwiring racial equity as were the efforts that got us to this place of unacceptable inequity. For example, a career ladder for entry-level workers and a structured fellowship and pipeline for future leaders, adding to our long-standing partnership with the Center for Leadership Development, a developing partnership with Martin University, supporting student internships and recruiting from historically Black colleges and universities, hiring from our patients' neighborhoods, addressing the disadvantage those without cars face in seeking care and getting to work, recognizing all Black mothers to be as high risk, and intensifying our prenatal care accordingly. Our energy for this work is high. We will not lose focus over time or be distracted by competing priorities. Given our role, our responsibility to our community, there is no higher priority.
My name is Dan Evans. I pledge to support the CICF goals for Marion County of family stabilization, economic mobility, criminal justice reform, neighborhood empowerment and placemaking, and dismantling systemic racism. I pledge to do so on behalf of myself and those over whom I have some influence. This effort must be measured by both words and action. The action must lead to measurable outcomes which benefit as many people and families as possible. Actions are required now. To that end, I pledge to redouble and measure the efforts of the Indiana Biosciences Research Institute, of which I am chair, located at 16 Tech up the street, ironically adjacent to the neighborhood that Chancellor Padar referred to a few minutes ago, to help 16 Tech to engage in the surrounding community in efforts to expand educational opportunities in STEM. By way of one example, these efforts to date have included working with Code Black Indiana. We must create sustained, enhanced educational and internship opportunities, and IBRI will lead in doing so. We now stand at a crossroads. We have stood here before. I have stood here before in almost this very spot. Justice has not been achieved. Our efforts now must focus on creating and fostering a community of mutual support and accountability. And Lupe, the letter to our leaders does exactly that. So I appreciate that, and I hope when you all listen to this again, you'll fast forward to both the manifesto and the 3 articles. I'm a lawyer, so I focused on those right away. The tactics, which is what those things recommend, and ways in which we will achieve our goals require a focused and steady effort by all. Leadership matters now more than ever. For my part, I pledge to redouble my efforts and do all I can persistently and with focus, and to pursue the goals mentioned above without hesitation or mental reservation.
This is Marion County Prosecutor Ryan Mears, and on behalf of the nearly 400 men and women who work in the office, we pledge to help make the criminal justice system a more fair and inclusive place. When I first became prosecutor, we made the decision to no longer prosecute simple possession of marijuana cases because we saw the disproportionate impact this law had on communities of color. We also launched our Second Chance Initiative, which allowed individuals to apply for early expungement, meaning that the prosecutor's office would help people get criminal convictions removed from their record so they could apply for more meaningful jobs and have access to better housing. All of these initiatives were designed to help reduce barriers for people in the criminal justice system and send a message of hope and fairness to the community. But we understand that there is still much work that needs to be done, and we must confront the issue of systematic racism in the criminal justice system. That is why the Marion County Prosecutor's Office pledges to create a conviction integrity review unit to root out past convictions that were based on bias or prejudice. We also pledge to make sure that our office reflects the community that we serve, and together, working together, we will make sure that the criminal justice system is a more fair and inclusive place.
Good afternoon. My name is Michael O'Connor, and I'm a current commissioner and board president of the Indianapolis Public School Board. Recently, IPS became the first school system in the country to establish a racial equity commitment and plan. What does that mean? It means that every action we take as a board must be viewed through the lens of racial equity. It means that we are, piece by piece, dismantling the racist policies of school boards past. What does it look like in action? Recently, we created a policy that stated any student interaction with our IPS police will not result in a referral to the criminal justice system unless required by state or federal statute. The result? IPS students will now be referred for counseling, for social and emotional supports, and to community programs for the help they may need. It means at IPS, we're doing our own little part to end the school-to-prison pipeline. The commitment to racial equity can't stop at the office or in board commitments. I must make my own commitment to racial equity and social justice. I must be willing to address my own white privilege. I can no longer look at an issue and simply say, something should be done. I must be the one doing something. That perspective is what caused me to get personally involved with the City of Indianapolis' effort to include community appointments to the IMPD General Orders Committee to make sure that the entire community has say in how it is policed. I must be willing to step out of my own comfort zone and into personal action.
Good afternoon. My name is Scott Fadness, and I'm the mayor in the City of Fishers. When I took the oath of office to become the mayor of the City of Fishers, I took the oath of the office for each and every resident in my community. It is my solemn responsibility to create an environment where each and every individual can reach their true potential. What has become clear to me over the last couple years is that nothing in my life experiences would prepare me or equip me to talk about the conversations around race. So I sought information and enlightenment, and I had the opportunity to go through a course, a 2-day course on interrupting racism, and it fundamentally changed the paradigm for which I view this problem. It so inspired me that I compelled each and every one of the leadership members on my team at the city to go through the program as well. And what has been truly, truly inspiring is to watch how it ignited humanity in each and every one of them to try to mobilize and create solutions in their own ways to address this issue. We all got together and decided that one of the most compelling things that we can do is provide that same resource, that same experience for each and every resident in our community. Today, as we stand here today, hundreds of residents are going through this process. They're going through this journey to change their paradigm, to understand how they can solve these problems in different ways. Now, some of us on this stage today may not agree on the tactics for which we're going to accomplish this, but what we are unified in is that we have to create an environment where each and every individual is treated with dignity and creates the opportunity to reach their true potential. And that is my commitment as long as I'm in my administration. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tony Mason, and I am President and CEO of the Indianapolis Urban League, and it's a pleasure to be with you here on this event. Just as it was a pleasure to join you last year in the launching of this initiative. And I have to tell you, our Urban League has been working to address racial inequity for decades. It's been a long-standing challenge in our city and in our state. I appreciate the commitments, the openness, and the transparency of everyone involved. But just know that accountability is important. In the past, accountability and commitment has not been there. 28% of Indianapolis's 248,000 African-American residents are poor. 70% are or were employed in what had been classified as bad jobs with low wages by the Brookings Institution. The average median household income for Black households is less than $28,000 compared to nearly $57,000 for white households. Black home ownership has declined from 46% to 31% since 2007. Our under-resourced schools are struggling to address the achievement gap. 70% of our Black students are failing standardized tests at a time when 62% of the available jobs in our new economy, according to the state of Indiana, will require some level of post-secondary education and training. So we've got work to do because the list goes on. We're partnering with each of you. We're also partnering with the African American Coalition to address many of these systemic and institutional racism challenges that exist in our community. But it's going to take each and every one of you leaning in, honoring the commitments that you're making here today to do this work. The reality of it is we've got to be here to support CICF with this challenge. We have to be our brothers and sisters keepers. If we don't do it now, when are we going to do it? History is repeating itself, so it requires each and every one of us, those who are here present today, those who are participating virtually, to do your part, lean in, and let's get to work. Thank you for having me.